The rain that morning was the kind Lagosians called persistent. It didn't pour in heavy bursts but fell in a steady, soaking drizzle that painted the streets silver. Ojuelegba bustled despite the weather. Yellow danfos honked endlessly. Hawkers in faded aprons weaved through traffic with trays of gala and pure water balanced on their heads, and Okada riders splashed through potholes without slowing down. Under the rusted iron railings of the pedestrian bridge, a boy stood barefoot in the cold, holding a baby wrapped in a worn Ankara scarf. His name was Tobias Cole, just 9 years old. His faded t-shirt clung to his bony shoulders, and his shorts were frayed at the edges. The baby in his arms, Chike let out a soft, shivery whimper, his small chest rising and falling unevenly. Tobias shifted the baby slightly, humming a cracked lullaby his mother used to sing. It was barely audible over the chaos of the street, but it kept Chike from crying harder. A thin nylon bag lay beside Tobias with an empty feeding bottle and a damp piece of cloth. He stretched out his free hand whenever someone passed, his voice low, almost apologetic. "Please, just small food for my brother." People reacted in different ways. Some glanced at him and shook their heads. Some pretended not to see him at all, and a few whispered to each other about scams. The boy heard them but didn't respond. He was too tired for explanations. Across the busy road, a black Range Rover inched forward through the traffic, its wipers brushing away rain rhythmically. Inside sat Ethan Blake, a 36-year-old billionaire real estate developer whose face often appeared in Business Day and Forbes Africa. He was headed for a high-stakes meeting in Victoria Island when his gaze landed on Tobias, a small, rain-soaked figure clutching a baby-like treasure. Something about the sight tugged at him sharply. "Stop the car," Ethan said suddenly to his driver. Without waiting for a reply, he stepped into the drizzle, his polished shoes splashing in puddles as he crossed the road toward the boy. Ethan slowed his steps as he approached the boy, not wanting to startle him. Up close, he could see how Tobias's small hands trembled from the cold, his lips tinged purple, his bare feet planted in a puddle without flinching. The baby in his arms stirred and gave a weak cry, but Tobias only tightened his hold and kept humming. Ethan crouched so they were eye level. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. Tobias didn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on Chike. "Gone," he replied in a voice that was flat, stripped of emotion. Ethan's brows knitted together. "Come with me," he said quietly. The boy's eyes finally met his, wary and searching. In Lagos, kindness from strangers was as rare as rain in December. Tobias knew this. Still, the baby's soft whimper made him hesitate, then nod slowly. Ethan offered his hand but didn't rush the boy. Together they walked back across the road to the waiting SUV. The driver opened the back door, shooting Ethan a puzzled look, but said nothing. Inside, the vehicle's warmth enveloped them immediately. Tobias sank into the seat, still clutching Chike as if the baby might be taken from him. Ethan reached into the side compartment and pulled out a clean towel. "Dry him first," he instructed. Tobias obeyed, carefully patting Chike's tiny arms and cheeks. He didn't even attempt to dry himself. His priority was clear. The car pulled away from the traffic toward a small restaurant tucked between a pharmacy and a printing shop in Surulere. Inside, a few customers glanced up as the rain-damp trio entered. Ethan ordered rice, beans, and soft agege bread. The steaming plate arrived moments later, and Tobias placed Chike on his lap, feeding him mashed beans with slow, careful fingers. Ethan watched, saying nothing. He'd seen generosity before, but never from someone with so little to give. Only after Chike was full and asleep did Tobias pick up the spoon for himself. The boy ate slowly, chewing each bite as though unsure when the next would come. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tobias," came the quiet reply. "And your age?" 9. Ethan hesitated before asking the question that lingered in his mind. "What happened to your parents?" Tobias's gaze dropped to Chike. "Mama got sick. We had no money. She told me to run with him before bad people came. So I did." His tone was matter-of-fact, but his knuckles whitened as he spoke. Ethan's chest tightened. "And your father?" Tobias shook his head. Never met him. Ethan wanted to ask more, but a glance at his watch reminded him of the meeting in Victoria Island. Still, leaving Tobias here felt wrong. He turned to the restaurant manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. Please, let him stay here until I come back. Give him anything he needs. I'll cover the bill. She nodded. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Tobias's shoulder. I'll be back, don't worry. The boy only nodded in return. Not long after Ethan left, Tobias noticed something missing. His heart pounded as his fingers searched the front of his shirt. His mother's necklace was gone. It was a simple beaded string with a dull gold pendant, but it was the only piece of her he had left. He scanned the floor, then the seat, then hurried outside with Chike still in his arms. The rain had eased, but the streets were slick and crowded. He retraced his steps toward the spot under the pedestrian bridge, his eyes darting over puddles and gutters. In his mind, finding that necklace was more important than waiting. He didn't know how far he had walked until he realized the restaurant was no longer in sight. When Ethan returned from his meeting nearly 2 hours later, the first thing he did was scan the restaurant for the boy. The chair in the corner was empty. "Where is the boy I left here?" he asked the manager, his voice tight. She frowned. "He left some time ago. I thought maybe you sent someone for him." Ethan's jaw clenched. "No, I told him to wait here." He stepped outside, scanning the road, but all he saw were pedestrians hurrying past and vendors calling out their goods. Meanwhile, Tobias was back near the bridge where Ethan had first found him. He shifted Chike to one arm, stooping to search under benches, along the gutter, and in piles of wet leaves. The baby whimpered from the constant movement, but Tobias only murmured, "Almost done, Chike. I can't lose Mama's necklace." His bare feet slapped against the wet concrete as he moved between corners, his small frame shivering with each gust of cold wind. As the light faded, he found himself sitting against a dusty wall, Chike asleep against his chest. The rain had stopped, but the damp still clung to the air. Around him, the city carried on, buses roared, hawkers shouted, and church speakers blared distant hymns. Tobias tightened the scarf around Chike and stared at the road ahead. That man from earlier, he had promised to come back. But promises on Lagos streets rarely lasted. In Ikoyi, Ethan sat on his balcony, the city lights below glittering in patches between shadows. His younger sister, Victoria Blake, had arrived home from London only a day earlier. She noticed him, staring into space, and teased, "You've barely said a word since I got back." Ethan told her about the boy and the baby in the rain. She chuckled softly. "You've always been a sucker for sad faces. Remember when you brought home that stray puppy?" Ethan shook his head, his tone suddenly firm. "This isn't a stray. He reminded me of someone I once loved." Far away in Ojuelegba, Tobias huddled with Chike under a torn tarpaulin behind a locked kiosk. The rain had seeped into his bones, and though Chike's small breaths were warm against his neck, Tobias felt the weight of hunger pressing in. He whispered to the baby, telling him stories about Mama, how she used to hum while cooking, how she called him my strong boy. Each word felt like a shield against the dark. Ethan lay awake that night, the image of Tobias feeding Chike before himself replaying over and over in his mind. The quiet strength in that act unsettled him. He had seen poverty before, but this was different. Somewhere deep inside, a question he couldn't name took root. By morning, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just forget. He needed to find that boy. At sunrise, Ethan's Range Rover eased back into the congested heart of Ojuelegba. He rolled down his window and asked around Okada riders, kiosk owners, the elderly newspaper vendor on the corner. Most shook their heads until the old vendor pointed under a wooden shade at the edge of the road. "He's there every morning. Quiet boy, always with that baby." Ethan followed the direction, and there Tobias was sitting cross-legged, cheek curled against his chest, his head bent low. The boy looked up slowly, and recognition flickered in his tired eyes. "I'm sorry," he blurted before Ethan could speak. "I dropped Mama's necklace. I went to find it, but I couldn't. When I came back, you weren't there." His voice cracked. but he kept his gaze steady. Ethan crouched to meet his eyes. "That doesn't matter now. I'm here. Come with me, both of you." Tobias hesitated only for a moment before nodding. This time, when Ethan offered his hand, the boy took it without looking back. The drive to Banana Island was long, slowed by morning traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge, but for Tobias it felt like entering another world. The massive gates of Ethan's mansion swung open to reveal sprawling lawns, tall palm trees, and a driveway paved so smooth it seemed impossible for Lagos. Tobias's eyes darted from the glistening fountain to the glass walls of the house, his grip on Chike tightening. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. A maid approached with a gentle smile. "Come," she said softly, "we'll take care of the baby." Tobias watched as Chike was carried off to be cleaned and fed. He followed, unwilling to let his brother out of sight, but the staff worked quickly: warm water, soft towels, and fresh clothes. The same care was given to Tobias. After a long soak in a tub of warm water, he emerged in a simple but clean shirt and shorts that actually fit. He stood barefoot in the hallway, staring at his reflection in a mirror, almost not recognizing the boy staring back. From the top of the staircase, Ethan watched him quietly. There was something about Tobias's face, the curve of his chin, the set of his jaw that stirred an old ache. He thought of Miriam, the young woman who had once worked in his home, the woman he had loved despite his family's disapproval. The resemblance was undeniable. But what truly unsettled him was what his driver found later that afternoon. A worn beaded necklace with a dull gold pendant tucked under the SUV's back seat. The same one Ethan had given Miriam years ago. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The necklace sat on his desk like a question demanding an answer. At dawn, he made a call to a private investigator he trusted. "Find everything you can about Miriam Cole," he said, "where she went after leaving my family's house, and if she had a child." 2 days later, the investigator returned with a thin file that felt heavier than steel. Miriam had given birth to a boy, Tobias, 9 years ago. The father's identity was never recorded. She had later had another child, Chike, with a different man who abandoned her shortly after. She died 2 months earlier from illness and malnutrition, living in a makeshift shack near Mile 12. The investigator's tone was factual, but every word felt like a blow to Ethan's chest. The timeline matched perfectly with the last time he'd seen Miriam. Ethan ordered a discreet DNA test using hair from Tobias's hairbrush. When the results came, he stared at the paper for a long time before his vision blurred. Tobias Cole, biological son of Ethan Blake. His hands trembled. He had a son who had grown up on the streets while he lived behind guarded gates. That evening, Ethan confronted Victoria in the sitting room. Her face paled when he told her the truth. At first, she claimed ignorance, but then her voice broke. She confessed that years ago, Miriam had returned to the house, visibly upset, and told their mother she was pregnant. Their mother's response had been brutal, accusing her of trying to trap Ethan, offering her money to deal with it before it became a scandal. Victoria had been too young to fully understand, but she remembered Miriam leaving in tears, the money left untouched on the stairs. Ethan sank into the sofa, his chest tight. All those unanswered calls, all the silence. Miriam hadn't abandoned him. She had been pushed away, and because of it, he had missed 9 years of his son's life. His eyes burned, but he didn't hide the tears. "I lost her twice," he said hoarsely, "and I almost lost him too." Victoria reached for his hand, but he stood, unable to sit still. That night, he went to Tobias's room. The boy was asleep, one hand resting on Chike's back. Ethan knelt beside the bed, his voice low and trembling. "I couldn't save your mother," he whispered, "but I will raise you both like my own." He stayed there for a long time, watching them breathe, as if memorizing the fact that they were finally safe. Weeks passed, and the mansion no longer felt like a stranger's place to Tobias. Chike's cough disappeared, replaced by the babbling laughter of a healthy baby. Victoria spent hours with Tobias, teaching him to write his name neatly and reading him stories on the balcony. Ethan, though busier than ever, made time to eat dinner with them almost every night. The bond between father and son grew naturally quiet moments over shared meals, unspoken understanding in their glances. One afternoon, a woman named Nora arrived at the gates. She was in her mid-30s with tired but kind eyes. She introduced herself as Chike's paternal aunt and explained she had been searching for him for months. When Ethan told her everything, she wept, grateful the boys were safe. He asked her for something unexpected, that she allow him to adopt Chike so the brothers could grow up together. Nora agreed without hesitation, asking only to visit from time to time. A month later, the adoption was finalized. On the day Ethan launched the Miriam Foundation for homeless mothers and children in Lekki, Tobias stood beside him in a crisp shirt, Chike in his arms. Facing the crowd, Ethan spoke with quiet conviction. "I thought I had everything until a boy in the rain taught me what it truly means to love." The applause was thunderous, but Ethan only glanced at Tobias and smiled. The boy who once stood alone in the rain was now home, for good. The end. What's your take on this story? Do you think Ethan did enough to make up for the years Tobias suffered, or was his redemption too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who loves emotional stories.